Sarah Mitchell was a 23-year-old psychology major at the University of Colorado Boulder. In her final semester before graduation, she lived in a shared apartment near campus with 2 roommates, worked part-time at a coffee shop on Pearl Street, and had never considered herself particularly outdoorsy despite growing up in Colorado. Her hobbies included reading, photography, and spending time with friends, and while she enjoyed occasional day hikes with her boyfriend James Porter, she had never gone on an extended backpacking trip alone. Sarah had grown up in the Denver suburbs, the daughter of Robert and Helen Mitchell, both high school teachers, and had spent most of her childhood focused on academics and indoor activities, rather than wilderness adventures. Her decision to take a solo backpacking trip in September 2013 surprised her friends and family, but Sarah explained she wanted to challenge herself, to prove she could do something outside her comfort zone before graduating and starting graduate school applications. She'd been dating James Porter, a software engineering student, for about 18 months, and he'd taken her on several day hikes around Boulder during their relationship, teaching her basic trail navigation and camping skills. Friends described Sarah as thoughtful and careful, though not particularly experienced with wilderness activities, someone who researched thoroughly before trying anything new, and always told multiple people her plans. When Sarah disappeared during a 5-day solo backpacking trip in Rocky Mountain National Park in September 2013, extensive searches found her vehicle with the keys hidden in the wheel well, as planned, her detailed trip itinerary posted on the dashboard, and her emergency contacts clearly listed, but Sarah herself had vanished without explanation. After 3 weeks of intensive searching, authorities declared her presumed dead, and her family held a memorial service in June 2014. The case went cold, filed away with dozens of other unsolved disappearances in Colorado's mountain wilderness. Then on March 17, 2015, at 2:47 p.m., solo rock climber Marcus Webb was ascending a frozen waterfall near the remote northwestern boundary of Rocky Mountain National Park when he encountered something that would reopen one of Colorado's most haunting missing persons cases. Approximately 3.7 miles from the nearest marked trail at an elevation of 11,840 feet, Webb's ice axe struck something that wasn't ice as he climbed Cathedral Ice, a seasonal frozen waterfall in an area known as the Cathedral Spires. Through the translucent blue-white surface of the ice, he could see the unmistakable outline of a human face, perfectly preserved, eyes partially open, staring through the frozen water. The woman appeared to be in her 20s, with long dark hair frozen in streams around her skull, dressed in a faded purple fleece jacket and worn hiking boots. Webb later told investigators he initially thought he'd found a climber from a recent accident, but something about the woman's clothing seemed wrong, outdated, as if she'd been there for years rather than weeks. He used his satellite phone to contact park rangers at 3:15 p.m., his voice shaking as he tried to explain what he'd found at GPS coordinates 40.455 degree in DOS 105.8123 degauss. The location was in one of the park's most remote sections, an area so isolated that even experienced mountaineers rarely ventured there outside summer months. Park rangers arrived at the scene at 5:20 p.m., using Webb's coordinates to locate the frozen waterfall. Chief Ranger Michael Torres led the recovery team, which included 2 technical climbing specialists and a forensic investigator from the Colorado Bureau of Investigation. The woman's body was encased in ice, approximately 8 feet thick, positioned in what appeared to be a seated posture, her back against the rock face behind the waterfall, her hands positioned in front of her chest as if she'd been trying to protect herself from the cold. The ice had preserved her so completely that individual features were clearly visible. Her facial expression showed no obvious trauma. Her eyes were partially open, her mouth slightly parted. Recovery specialists determined that extracting the body would require carefully melting the surrounding ice, a delicate process that took 6 hours, working through the night under portable floodlights with propane heaters and warm water. The woman was finally freed at 11:40 p.m., her body transferred to a thermal recovery bag for transport. The descent from the waterfall took another 4 hours, with technical climbers lowering the recovery bag using rope systems, and by 4 a.m. on March 18th the body had been transported to Poudre Valley Hospital in Fort Collins. Dr. Patricia Ramirez, the attending emergency physician, conducted the initial medical examination at 5:30 a.m. on March 18th. The body showed remarkable preservation due to the freezing conditions, though vital signs were obviously absent. No pulse, no respiration. Core body temperature matching ambient air temperature at 34 degrees Fahrenheit. However, the physical condition of the remains provided extensive information about the victim's final state. The woman showed signs of severe malnutrition and extended exposure to harsh conditions, with body weight estimated at 92 pounds, suggesting significant weight loss from an original healthy weight. Her hair, which extended to mid-back length, showed signs of having been cut irregularly with a sharp blade, possibly stone, and her fingernails were broken and worn to the quick, with visible scarring on her fingertips suggesting repeated trauma. Most strikingly, her feet showed evidence of long-term barefoot travel in rough terrain. Thick calluses on soles, healed lacerations, compression fractures in 3 metatarsal bones that had healed without medical treatment. Her skin displayed extensive sun damage and weathering, particularly on exposed areas like her face, hands, and neck, while multiple healed scars were visible on her arms and legs, including what appeared to be defensive wounds on her forearms and a long healed laceration on her left thigh. Forensic examination revealed unusual markings on her upper back and shoulders, what appeared to be deliberate scarification in geometric patterns, the wounds old enough to have healed into raised keloid tissue, which Dr. Ramirez noted were consistent with ritualistic scarification rather than accidental injury. Toxicology screening showed no presence of drugs or alcohol, but did indicate severe vitamin D deficiency, protein deficiency, and electrolyte imbalances consistent with chronic malnutrition. X-rays revealed healed rib fractures on the left side. At least 3 ribs showed evidence of breaks that had healed naturally over time, suggesting injuries sustained months or even years before death. Dental examination showed generally good condition teeth, but with signs of extended periods without proper oral hygiene, and the medical team estimated time of death as occurring approximately 3 to 5 months before discovery, meaning the victim had died sometime between October 2014 and December 2014. It would take 6 hours of intensive investigation, fingerprint analysis, and DNA confirmation before authorities confirmed what seemed impossible. This woman was Sarah Mitchell, the wilderness guide from Boulder, Colorado, who had been presumed dead since March 2014. 18 months earlier, Sarah's story had begun as a routine solo backpacking expedition. In early September 2013, Sarah planned a 5-day solo backpacking trip through the Mummy Range, a remote section of Rocky Mountain National Park, known for its isolation and challenging terrain. Her itinerary filed with the Park Service on September 3rd documented her intended route, starting at the Lawn Lake Trailhead, proceeding north to Mummy Pass, then looping back via the Hague Creek drainage approximately 42 miles through some of the park's most isolated backcountry. Her route would take her through terrain ranging from 9,400 to 11,800 feet elevation, with planned campsites at established locations and detailed notes about water sources and emergency exit routes. She filed her wilderness permit on September 3, 2013, listing her start date as September 8th and expected return as September 12th. Her emergency contacts included James Porter, her partner, and her parents, Robert and Helen Mitchell, both retired teachers living in Boulder. On September 7th, the day before departure, Sarah had dinner with James in Boulder, showing him her new GPS unit, and reviewing her detailed itinerary, pointing out each planned campsite on topographic maps. She was always so careful, James later testified. She'd check and recheck everything. Sarah spent the night at home and made her final preparations, packing her gear with characteristic precision. A lightweight 2-person tent, sleeping bag rated to -15 degrees, water filtration system, 10 days of freeze-dried meals, first aid kit, satellite phone, personal locator beacon, and a topographic GPS unit. On September 8, 2013, at 6:15 a.m., Sarah signed in at the Wilderness Permit Office at the Lawn Lake Trailhead, meeting Ranger Thomas Hernandez, who reviewed her route and noted her vehicle's location in the parking area. Hernandez's notes described Sarah as prepared, nervous, but determined, first major solo trip. She began hiking at approximately 6:30 a.m., her vehicle, a 2008 Toyota 4Runner registered to her parents, properly parked with emergency contact information displayed on the dashboard. On September 8th at 8:42 a.m., she texted James from her satellite phone, "Mile 4, making good time, beautiful morning." The message included GPS coordinates indicating she'd reached the junction with the Black Canyon Trail, approximately 4 miles from the trailhead, elevation 9,180 feet. On September 8th at 11:23 a.m., she sent another text from near Lawn Lake, reporting she'd covered 8 miles and planned to reach her first campsite by mid-afternoon. On September 8th at 2:37 p.m., she made her last documented contact. "Amazing views up here. See you Friday. Love you." The GPS coordinates placed her at 10,140 feet elevation, roughly half a mile south of Mummy Pass. After that message, Sarah Mitchell disappeared completely. On September 11th, when Sarah failed to return as planned, James checked the trailhead at 9:30 a.m. and confirmed her vehicle remained in place exactly where she'd left it 3 days earlier. By noon, 3 hours overdue, James contacted the Larimer County Sheriff's Department, and a missing person report was filed with Rocky Mountain National Park Rangers. Robert and Helen Mitchell were notified at 1:15 p.m. and immediately drove from Boulder, arriving at the trailhead by 3 p.m. The search began on September 11, 2013, becoming one of Rocky Mountain National Park's most extensive operations that year. Search and Rescue Coordinator Linda Martinez assembled 42 personnel, including park rangers, volunteers from mountain rescue organizations, K-9 units, and helicopter crews from the Colorado National Guard. Ground teams methodically covered Sarah's planned route, while helicopter teams conducted aerial reconnaissance using thermal imaging equipment. K-9 teams picked up Sarah's scent along the trail to Lawn Lake and tracked it north toward Mummy Pass, confirming she traveled the route she'd planned. However, at a point approximately 1 mile south of Mummy Pass, near a rocky ridgeline at 11,200 feet elevation, the K-9 teams lost the scent entirely, circling the area repeatedly but showing no directional preference for where she might have gone. Search teams found no evidence of an accident, struggle, or injury at the location where the scent trail ended. The terrain in the area was brutally difficult. Loose scree slopes, dense subalpine forest, and labyrinthine rock formations that created countless hidden gullies and crevasses where a body could remain concealed indefinitely. On September 14th, searchers discovered Sarah's trekking poles leaning against a boulder near Mummy Pass, approximately 400 yards from where the scent trail ended. The poles showed no signs of damage or distress and appeared to have been deliberately placed, almost carefully set aside, which intensified the search but also deepened the mystery. Why would an experienced hiker abandon essential equipment in rough terrain? On September 18th, search teams found Sarah's water bottle lying in a creek bed 3 miles northeast of Mummy Pass, in terrain well outside her planned route. The bottle was half full, the water still fresh, and forensic examination determined Sarah's fingerprints were the only ones present on the bottle. Over 3 weeks, the search expanded to include adjacent wilderness areas, with teams checking every accessible lake, stream, and camping area within 15 miles of Sarah's last known position. By September 25th, 217 people had participated in the search effort, covering over 200 square miles of wilderness using ground teams, helicopters, K-9 units, and even drones equipped with thermal cameras. By September 28, 2013, the active search was suspended. Sheriff's Department spokesperson Rachel Morrison announced the decision at a press conference, explaining that teams had exhausted all reasonable search areas and that the likelihood of finding Sarah alive had diminished to near zero, with the case officially transitioning to recovery mode. Sarah's parents, Robert and Helen Mitchell, issued a statement through their attorney thanking the search teams but expressing devastation that their daughter remained missing and requesting that the case remain open. On March 3, 2014, after 6 months with no new developments, a Larimer County judge granted a petition to have Sarah Mitchell declared legally dead, citing the extensive search efforts, the harsh wilderness environment, and the absence of any evidence suggesting Sarah had left the area voluntarily. Her death certificate listed the cause as presumed wilderness accident, and the date as September 8, 2013, the last day anyone had confirmed contact with her. James Porter collected Sarah's life insurance policy of $150,000 in May 2014, and her parents held a memorial service on June 7, 2014, at a Boulder church attended by over 300 people, including colleagues from Rocky Mountain Adventures, fellow guides, and dozens of people Sarah had led on wilderness expeditions. They placed a memorial plaque at the Lawn Lake trailhead with Sarah's photo and a quote she'd often repeated, "The mountains are calling." The case file was moved to inactive status, joining dozens of other unsolved disappearances in Colorado's wilderness areas, and time passed, the intensive media coverage faded, and Sarah's story became one more cautionary tale shared among hikers about the unforgiving nature of high-altitude wilderness. Marcus Webb's discovery on March 17, 2015, occurred during an unseasonably warm spring that had caused accelerated snowmelt throughout the Rockies, with the frozen waterfall where Webb had been climbing, Cathedral Ice, being a seasonal formation that typically melted completely by mid-May. The warm temperatures had caused portions of the ice to become translucent, almost glass-like, revealing what had been hidden beneath for months. FBI Special Agent Jennifer Wu, assigned to the Denver Field Office's Missing Persons Unit, arrived at Poudre Valley Hospital at 8 a.m. on March 18th. She immediately recognized the potential connection to Sarah Mitchell's case, based on the victim's approximate age. The location of the discovery and the timeline and fingerprint analysis confirmed the identification at 2:35 p.m. that same day. The prints matched Sarah Mitchell's on file with the Colorado Department of Motor Vehicles. DNA analysis, conducted as a secondary confirmation, matched samples from Robert and Helen Mitchell, conclusively establishing identity. The death certificate that had declared Sarah dead 18 months earlier would need to be amended, but the grim reality was that she had indeed died in the wilderness, just not when or how anyone had assumed. FBI Agent Wu personally notified Robert and Helen Mitchell at their Boulder home at 6 p.m. on March 18th, explaining that their daughter had been found but had been dead for months, and that the circumstances of her death raised disturbing questions about what had happened during the 18-month period she'd been missing. Wu explained that preliminary evidence suggested Sarah had not died in a hiking accident on September 8, 2013 as presumed, but had survived for a significant period afterward under circumstances that remained unclear, and the Mitchells, already devastated by their daughter's presumed death, now faced the horror of learning she'd endured prolonged suffering before finally succumbing. The FBI and Colorado Bureau of Investigation immediately launched a joint investigation into the circumstances of Sarah's death. The discovery location, 3.7 miles from where she'd last been seen, in terrain she had no documented reason to visit, suggested something had gone badly wrong after her final GPS text on September 8, 2013. The condition of her body, the ritual scarification, the evidence of prolonged malnutrition and untreated injuries, all pointed toward a scenario far more sinister than a simple wilderness accident. Lead investigator Detective Marcus Sullivan from the Larimer County Sheriff's Department assembled a specialized task force on March 19, 2015, including FBI agents with experience in kidnapping cases, forensic anthropologists, wilderness search specialists, and criminal psychologists. Their primary objective was to locate where Sarah had been held during the 18 months between her disappearance and death, with the frozen waterfall where her body was discovered clearly not being the primary site. It appeared Sarah had crawled or been placed there shortly before death, possibly seeking shelter from winter weather. Search teams returned to the Cathedral Spires area on March 20th, this time looking not for a lost hiker, but for evidence of long-term habitation, expanding their search radius to include every cave system, rock shelter, and secluded area within a 5-mile radius of the waterfall. The breakthrough came on March 27, 2015, when a search team exploring a network of caves on the eastern face of Cathedral Peak discovered unmistakable signs of human habitation. The cave entrance was concealed behind a dense growth of scrub pine and deliberately obscured with carefully stacked rocks that blended perfectly with the surrounding cliff face, with only close inspection revealing the entrance. a narrow gap approximately 3 feet high and 2 feet wide, requiring crawlers to enter on hands and knees. The entrance tunnel extended 12 feet into the mountainside, before opening into a larger chamber roughly 15 feet in diameter and 7 feet high at the center. What the search team found inside transformed the investigation from a recovery operation into a criminal case. The cave had been modified extensively for long-term habitation, with someone having carved storage niches into the walls, created a ventilation shaft by enlarging a natural crack in the ceiling, and built a sophisticated fire pit with a stone chimney system that directed smoke out through the ventilation crack. The floor had been leveled and covered with layers of pine boughs and animal hides, while crude furniture had been constructed from branches lashed together with stripped bark. A sleeping platform, a work table, storage shelves. The cave contained evidence of years, not months, of occupation. Forensic teams documented everything methodically, photographing every surface and collecting hundreds of samples. They found Sarah's backpack, still containing her satellite phone and personal locator beacon. Both devices had been disassembled, their batteries removed and carefully stored separately. Her topographic GPS unit had been smashed, the screen shattered, the circuit board broken into pieces. The cave contained other personal items clearly belonging to Sarah: her journal, water filtration system, portions of her tent cut into sections, her sleeping bag. But the cave also contained items that belonged to someone else. A second backpack, much older and more weathered, bore a faded label, property of Michael Ashford. Inside, investigators found a Colorado driver's license issued to Michael David Ashford. Date of birth July 3, 1971, address listed in Colorado Springs. A quick database check revealed Ashford had been reported missing on June 8, 2011 at age 39, after failing to return from a solo hiking trip in Rocky Mountain National Park. His case had followed the same pattern as Sarah's: extensive search, no findings, eventual presumption of death. The cave contained Ashford's identification, camping equipment, clothing, and personal effects, but there were also items suggesting religious obsession carried to extreme lengths. The walls of the cave were covered with writings, hundreds of Bible passages copied in cramped handwriting using charcoal and ochre, with the passages focusing obsessively on themes of wilderness exile, purification through suffering, and divine testing. Entire chapters from Exodus, passages about Jesus' 40 days in the desert, Old Testament stories of prophets living in caves, all copied repeatedly, sometimes the same passage written dozens of times in different areas of the cave. One section of wall contained what appeared to be Ashford's personal theology, written in first person. I am the last prophet. I have been called to live as John the Baptist lived, as Jesus lived in the wilderness. The world below is corruption. Only here, in purity and isolation, can the truth be known. I will build a temple in the mountains. I will gather those who are lost and teach them the way of suffering, for through suffering comes salvation. The cave contained a detailed journal kept by Ashford, documenting his gradual descent into religious delusion, with entries beginning rationally enough in June 2011, describing his initial hiking trip, his decision to extend his journey, his discovery of the cave system. But over the following months, the entries became increasingly disturbed, describing divine visions, conversations with God, a growing conviction that he'd been chosen for a special purpose. And by late 2011, Ashford was describing his intention to remain in the wilderness permanently, to live as the ancient prophets had lived. The journal entries from 2012 and early 2013 focused on preparations for what Ashford called his temple, gathering materials, modifying the cave system, creating tools and weapons. The most disturbing discovery was a second chamber, accessible through a narrow passage at the back of the main cave, smaller than the main chamber, approximately 8 feet by 6 feet, with a ceiling barely 4 feet high. The entrance could be blocked from the outside with a boulder that fit perfectly into the passage, effectively creating a prison cell. Inside this chamber, investigators found evidence that Sarah Mitchell had been confined there for extended periods, with her sleeping bag present, along with a water container and evidence of a waste disposal area. The walls showed scratch marks, places where fingernails had gouged the stone, leaving traces of blood and tissue. Carved into one wall, barely visible, were words Sarah had etched using a small stone. Sarah Mitchell, Boulder. Mom, Dad, James, I love you. September 2013. Below this, she'd scratched a series of hash marks, apparently attempting to track the passage of time, with the marks grouped in sets of 7, suggesting she'd tried to count weeks. There were 93 complete groups of 7 marks, plus 4 additional marks, totaling 655 days, or approximately 21 months, suggesting she'd marked time until shortly before her death. Forensic analysis of the cave revealed biological evidence confirming both Ashford and Sarah had lived there for extended periods, with DNA analysis identifying their hair, skin cells, and blood in various locations. Radiocarbon dating of charcoal from the fire pit indicated continuous use from approximately mid-2011 through late 2014. The cave also contained human remains that would further complicate the investigation. In a third, smaller chamber discovered behind the inner chamber, searchers found a partial skeleton, badly decomposed and partially scattered by animals. The bones were subsequently identified through DNA analysis as belonging to Jessica Reynolds, a 26-year-old geologist from Fort Collins who had disappeared while conducting fieldwork in Rocky Mountain National Park on July 22, 2012. Her case had also been extensively investigated with no resolution until this discovery, and the skeletal remains showed evidence of blunt force trauma to the skull. The manner of death was clearly homicide. Reynolds had been dead for approximately 3 years, meaning she died within a year of Ashford's own disappearance. Sarah Mitchell's journal, found in the cave, revealed the complete narrative of her ordeal. Forensic psychologist Dr. Raymond Torres analyzed the entries, which Sarah had continued writing throughout most of her captivity, documenting what had happened after her final GPS text on September 8, 2013. According to her journal, after sending her final GPS text at 2:37 p.m., Sarah had continued north toward Mummy Pass when she encountered a man near a rock outcropping at approximately 3:15 p.m. Michael Ashford, though she didn't know his identity at the time. Sarah wrote that Ashford appeared to be a typical hiker at first, friendly, asking about her route, and he offered to show her a spectacular overlook just a quarter-mile off trail, a viewpoint he claimed wasn't marked on any maps. Sarah, inexperienced and trusting, not recognizing the danger, followed him to what she thought would be a scenic viewpoint. The overlook was real, but it was also a trap. Once they were in an isolated area, Ashford had pulled a knife fashioned from a sharpened piece of metal, possibly part of a broken camping pot, and forced Sarah to accompany him. He took her GPS unit and satellite phone, smashing them against rocks, then tied her hands with cord, stripped from climbing rope, and led her through rough terrain for several hours, taking routes that left no clear trail, eventually arriving at the cave system near Cathedral Peak. Sarah wrote that her initial reaction was disbelief. Surely this was a temporary situation. Surely search teams would find her. But Ashford had years of experience evading detection, knew every hidden route, understood search patterns, and had watched her from a distance before approaching, waiting for a moment when she was alone and vulnerable. Sarah's journal documented the psychological manipulation Ashford employed over the following months. He presented himself as a prophet, claimed he'd been sent visions of her coming, insisted she'd been called to join his wilderness mission of purification and suffering. He forced her to participate in multi-hour prayer sessions, required her to copy Bible passages onto the cave walls, made her recite specific verses repeatedly, and controlled her through a combination of religious indoctrination, physical intimidation, and isolation. The journal entries from early captivity showed Sarah's attempts to maintain hope, her plans for escape, her determination to survive and return to James and her parents. But Ashford was vigilant and brutal when necessary. Sarah wrote about one early escape attempt in November 2013 when she'd managed to slip away while Ashford was checking animal traps, making it approximately 2 miles before he tracked her down. He'd beaten her severely, breaking 3 ribs, then confined her to the inner chamber for what she estimated was 3 weeks with minimal food, and after that escape attempts became less frequent. The psychological impact of captivity showed clearly in the progression of Sarah's journal entries. By mid-2014, her writing showed signs of dissociation, confusion about whether her previous life had been real, acceptance of Ashford's insistence that they were living as God intended. She wrote about Ashford's increasing paranoia, his conviction that searchers were hunting him, his preparations for violent confrontation if discovered. Sarah's journal revealed that Jessica Reynolds had been in the cave when Sarah first arrived in September 2013, having been held captive for over a year at that point, severely malnourished and psychologically broken. Sarah wrote that Reynolds barely spoke, seemed to exist in a dissociative state, and that Ashford forced both women to work on his temple project, hauling stones, modifying cave chambers, gathering materials. Reynolds died in March 2014. According to Sarah's journal, Sarah wrote that Reynolds had attempted escape, and Ashford had struck her with a stone during the struggle, the blow proving fatal, and Ashford had disposed of Reynolds' body in the far chamber, forbidding Sarah from entering that space. The journal entries after Reynolds' death showed Sarah's complete psychological collapse. She wrote that she no longer remembered what month it was, couldn't recall if her previous life had been real or imagined, couldn't distinguish between Ashford's teachings and her own thoughts. By late 2014, Sarah's entries had become fragmented, sometimes just single words repeated: cold, hungry, sorry, gone. The final journal entry, dated by forensic analysis to early December 2014, read, "Weather turning bad. Ashford gone 3 days looking for food. I can't feel my feet. The cold is inside me now. I thought about the waterfall, the one with the ice cathedral. I remembered you telling me about it, James. Beautiful place to rest. I'm going there now. I'm so tired. I love you. I love Mom and Dad. Tell them I tried. I really tried." The forensic evidence supported this final narrative. Sarah had left the cave during a severe December snowstorm, had made her way 3.7 miles through brutal conditions to the frozen waterfall where Webb would find her 4 months later, crawling behind the waterfall, likely seeking shelter from wind and snow, where she died of hypothermia and exhaustion, her body gradually becoming encased in ice as the winter progressed. The manhunt for Michael Ashford began immediately after the cave discovery on March 27, 2015. FBI Special Agent Wu coordinated the effort, bringing in resources from multiple agencies, while background investigation revealed Ashford had been a software engineer in Colorado Springs, unmarried with no criminal record. Co-workers described him as intelligent but increasingly withdrawn in the months before his disappearance, and his apartment, sealed since 2011, was searched on March 28, revealing a disturbing progression toward religious obsession. Bookshelves contained dozens of religious texts, wilderness survival manuals, and books about hermits and desert fathers, while his computer hard drive showed internet searches for remote cave systems, edible wild plants, primitive tool making, and increasingly disturbing religious content about suffering and purification. The search for Ashford focused initially on the area around Cathedral Peak, with tracking teams finding evidence he'd left the cave system sometime in late November or early December 2014, around the same time Sarah had departed. Boot prints and disturbed ground suggested he'd headed east, deeper into the wilderness, possibly attempting to reach a different cave system or to flee the area entirely. Search teams covered over 100 square miles over 2 weeks, checking every cave, every drainage, every possible shelter, with helicopter crews using thermal imaging and K9 units tracking potential scent trails. The break in the case came not from the search teams but from a discovery made by Bureau of Land Management rangers patrolling the Rawa Wilderness area, approximately 38 miles north of Cathedral Peak. On April 14, 2015, rangers investigating an illegal campsite found the skeletal remains of a man in a shallow rock shelter, with the body severely decomposed and partially consumed by scavengers. Forensic examination determined death had occurred approximately 4 to 5 months earlier, late 2014, and personal effects found with the remains included a wallet containing Michael Ashford's driver's license and credit cards. Dental records and DNA analysis confirmed the identification, with cause of death determined to be exposure combined with malnutrition and possible internal injuries from a fall. Evidence at the scene suggested Ashford had been attempting to reach a more remote location when winter weather and his deteriorating physical condition had proven fatal, with his skeletal remains showing signs of severe malnutrition, untreated injuries, and the physical toll of years living in extreme conditions. The discovery meant that Ashford would never face trial, never be held accountable in a courtroom for what he'd done, and the case officially closed on April 20, 2015, when the FBI announced that Michael Ashford was deceased and no other suspects were being sought in the deaths of Sarah Mitchell and Jessica Reynolds. The legal aftermath was complex and painful for the victims' families. Sarah Mitchell's case presented unique challenges. She'd been declared legally dead in March 2014, but had actually died in December 2014, 9 months later, while James Porter had collected her life insurance policy during the period when she was actually still alive, though neither he nor the insurance company had any way of knowing this. After consultation with attorneys, James established a memorial fund in Sarah's name with the insurance proceeds, dedicating the money to wilderness safety education and search and rescue equipment. Jessica Reynolds' family filed a wrongful death lawsuit against Rocky Mountain National Park in June 2015, arguing that inadequate search procedures after Reynolds' disappearance had failed to locate the cave system where she was held captive and ultimately murdered. The lawsuit was settled out of court in January 2016 for an undisclosed amount, with the Park Service agreeing to implement enhanced search protocols and maintain a more detailed database of known cave systems. The Larimer County District Attorney's Office worked with the FBI to ensure proper documentation of all evidence, despite the fact that no trial would occur, preparing a comprehensive report detailing the crimes committed, kidnapping, unlawful imprisonment, and murder in the case of Jessica Reynolds, establishing an official record even though the perpetrator was dead. The families of all three victims, Sarah, Jessica Reynolds, and Ashford himself, participated in victim impact statements included in the final report, describing the devastating effects of the tragedy. Ashford's elderly mother, Louise Ashford of Colorado Springs, attended these proceedings and issued a statement expressing profound sorrow for what her son had done, though she maintained he'd been suffering from severe mental illness and delusions that had gone untreated. The medical and psychological reports painted a comprehensive picture of Sarah Mitchell's ordeal and its impact. Chief forensic psychiatrist Dr. Raymond Torres issued a detailed psychological autopsy based on Sarah's journal entries, concluding she had experienced severe trauma bonding and dissociation as survival mechanisms, with the diagnosis applied posthumously, including complex post-traumatic stress disorder, dissociative identity disturbance, and what Torres termed captivity-induced delusional incorporation, a condition where victims gradually adopt elements of their captor's belief system as a psychological defense. Torres noted that Sarah's writings showed a clear pattern: initial resistance followed by attempts to maintain her identity through journal keeping, then gradual erosion of self, and finally a kind of psychological surrender that made continued survival possible, even as it destroyed her previous sense of self. The physical evidence supported these conclusions. Sarah's body showed the long-term effects of chronic malnutrition, including muscle wasting, bone density loss, and multiple vitamin deficiencies, while the healed fractures indicated periods of violence or accidents without medical care. The scarification marks on her back were determined to be ritualistic in nature, likely inflicted by Ashford as part of his religious delusions, and medical examiners estimated Sarah had lost approximately 40 pounds during captivity, reducing her from a healthy weight of around 130 pounds to her final weight of 92 pounds. Her feet showed adaptations to barefoot travel, thickened skin, altered bone structure, calluses up to 3 millimeters thick, suggesting months or years walking without shoes, while toxicology reports indicated she'd consumed a diet consisting primarily of wild plants, minimal animal protein, and inadequate calories for her level of physical activity. The manner of Sarah's death was officially classified as homicide by unlawful imprisonment, leading to exposure with hypothermia as the immediate cause, while Jessica Reynolds' death was classified as homicide by blunt force trauma, and Michael Ashford's death was ruled accidental, caused by exposure and malnutrition in combination with his severely compromised physical and mental state. The aftermath of the case brought changes to wilderness safety protocols throughout Colorado and other states with extensive backcountry areas. Rocky Mountain National Park implemented a mandatory check-in system for solo backcountry hikers, requiring satellite phone contact at predetermined intervals, while the Park Service allocated funding for comprehensive mapping and documentation of all known cave systems within park boundaries, a project that would take 3 years to complete. Additional resources were dedicated to training search and rescue teams in psychological profiling of potential abduction cases versus accidental disappearances, and the Colorado Bureau of Investigation established a specialized unit for investigating missing persons cases in wilderness areas, recognizing that not all disappearances resulted from accidents. Sarah Mitchell's case became a training example in FBI courses on abduction survival, psychological manipulation, and extended captivity, and her journal, after being held as evidence, was eventually returned to her family. Robert and Helen Mitchell established the Sarah Mitchell Wilderness Safety Foundation in September 2016, dedicated to educating hikers about safety in remote areas and supporting search and rescue operations, with the foundation funding purchase of enhanced GPS tracking equipment, satellite communication devices for loan to hikers, and training programs for search teams. James Porter, who never fully recovered from the trauma of losing Sarah, spoke at several foundation events, but eventually moved to Oregon, seeking distance from the memories and media attention, describing the unique pain of knowing Sarah had survived for 18 months while he'd believed her dead, and the torture of reading her journal entries, documenting her suffering and her thoughts of him during captivity. Yet the case left significant questions unanswered. Investigators determined that Ashford's cave system had been occupied since approximately June 2011, but evidence suggested he might have been living in the wilderness even earlier, with his backpack containing items predating his official disappearance, and the cave showing modifications that would have required months or years to complete. Had Ashford been living in the wilderness part-time before his official disappearance in June 2011? Had there been other victims before Jessica Reynolds? In the year between Ashford's disappearance and Reynolds' abduction in July 2012, a review of unsolved missing persons cases in Colorado identified at least 6 individuals who disappeared in Rocky Mountain National Park or adjacent wilderness areas between 2011 and 2013. And while no evidence directly linked these cases to Ashford, 3 of the missing persons matched the profile of Ashford's known victims: young, physically fit hiking solo. Search teams conducted additional explorations of cave systems in the area, finding 2 other locations that showed signs of habitation and contained items that couldn't be definitively sourced, raising the possibility that other victims might have been held and died in locations not yet discovered. The question of whether Ashford had accomplices or had been part of a larger group was never fully resolved. Some of the modifications to the cave system appeared to require more than one person, and certain passages in Ashford's journal made ambiguous references to "we" and "others" that could have indicated collaborators, or could have been delusional references to imagined companions. No evidence of other perpetrators was found, but the possibility couldn't be completely eliminated. The case also raised difficult questions about the nature of search operations in wilderness areas. Sarah had been held in a cave system only 3.7 miles from where she'd last been seen, yet extensive searches had failed to locate her for 18 months. The cave entrance had been deliberately concealed, and Ashford had deep knowledge of the terrain, but some search and rescue experts argued that more intensive focus on cave systems during the initial search might have changed the outcome, and these debates led to policy changes, but also to recognition of the inherent limitations of searching vast, complex wilderness areas, where someone intent on hiding can remain concealed. The lasting impact of Sarah Mitchell's case extends far beyond the immediate facts of her disappearance and death. It shattered the assumption that wilderness tragedies always result from accidents or poor judgment. Sarah had done everything right. She was experienced, prepared, had proper equipment, filed a detailed trip plan, maintained regular communication until the moment she was abducted, and her case demonstrated that even careful, prepared hikers, regardless of experience level, remain vulnerable to human predation in remote areas. The psychological dimension of the case, Sarah's 18-month ordeal, the gradual erosion of her identity, her ultimate decision to leave the cave and seek death on her own terms at the frozen waterfall, provided disturbing insights into the effects of captivity and the limits of human psychological resilience. For the outdoor recreation community, Sarah's disappearance became a watershed moment, prompting conversations about safety that went beyond bears, weather, and getting lost, with hiking groups developing protocols for checking in on each other, for noticing when someone doesn't return as planned, for understanding that presumed dead doesn't always mean the search should end. The families of the victims continue to live with the aftermath. Robert and Helen Mitchell visit the cathedral ice waterfall each September on the anniversary of their daughter's disappearance, placing flowers and spending time at the site where she died, and they've advocated for keeping the cave system where Sarah was held closed to the public, arguing it should be treated as a memorial site rather than a destination for the morbidly curious. The FBI maintains an open file on potential related cases, and search efforts continue periodically in areas where Ashford might have operated before his known crimes. As recently as August 2023, a team of volunteer searchers explored a newly discovered cave system 40 miles south of Cathedral Peak, finding evidence of human habitation but no definitive links to Ashford or unidentified victims. The Cathedral Spires area, once known primarily for its challenging climbing routes, now carries a darker reputation, with some hikers avoiding it entirely, uncomfortable with its association with the case, while others visit specifically to pay respects, leaving small memorials at the base of the frozen waterfall where Marcus Webb made his grim discovery. Rocky Mountain National Park officials maintain that the area is safe, that Ashford's crimes were the acts of a single disturbed individual, but the sense of innocence about the wilderness has been permanently altered. The question that haunts everyone connected to the case is whether earlier intervention might have changed the outcome. If search teams had found the cave system in September 2013, Sarah and Jessica Reynolds might both have been rescued alive. And if Ashford had received mental health treatment before his delusions became all-consuming, he might never have become a predator. If the pattern of his internet searches and his increasingly disturbed behavior before his disappearance had triggered some kind of intervention, the entire tragic chain of events might have been prevented. But these are the agonizing what-ifs that follow any such case, questions that have no satisfying answers, only the cold reality of what did happen. Sarah Mitchell was 23 years old when she disappeared, 25 when she died, having spent 18 months enduring conditions that most people cannot imagine, watching another captive die, gradually losing herself to isolation and manipulation, and finally walking alone through a winter storm to a frozen waterfall where she chose to rest. Her journal, her scratched messages on cave walls, and the testimony of those who knew her preserve some sense of who she was and what she suffered, while the wilderness that she loved, that she'd spent years exploring and learning to read, became her prison and ultimately her tomb. Marcus Webb's ice axe striking that translucent blue surface on March 17, 2015, broke more than frozen water. It broke the seal on a case that revealed the darkest possibilities lurking in places that seem pristine and pure. The mountains still call, as Sarah's memorial plaque says, but now that call carries an echo of warning, a reminder that beauty and danger coexist, that isolation can mean freedom or imprisonment, that the line between adventure and tragedy can vanish in a moment when the wrong person appears on an empty trail. The frozen waterfall still forms each winter and still melts each spring, with rangers monitoring it now, ensuring no one tries to climb it without proper authorization, maintaining their vigil, but the ice keeps its secrets between seasons. And the vast wilderness of the Rockies holds many caves, many hidden places, many stories not yet told. Sarah Mitchell's story has ended, documented and closed, but the questions it raises about vulnerability, about the nature of human evil, about the cost of survival, remain open, troubling, and unresolved.